They say that when the old world ended, it did not die in fire alone, but in memory. For the fire was swift and merciful, yet memory endured, heavy as ash, upon the tongue. Out of that ash rose the first pilgrims, barefoot soldiers of faith, who no longer spoke the language of nations, but of survival, of prayer, of silence. In their eyes, the earth was no longer a map but a wound, and from that wound they sought to build redemption. Where Jerusalem had once stood, the ground was torn open, a crater of glass and sorrow. They called it the wound of God, and none approached without trembling, for it was said that beneath its depths, the divine and the damned spoke in one voice, a whisper that broke the mind and sanctified the heart. It was here, amid ruin and revelation, that the foundations of a new city were laid, not a city of kings, but of penitents, not built upward, but downward, each stone a prayer, each wall a confession. They named it New Antioch, a fortress of faith, standing at the edge of the abyss. It was a name borrowed from an older time, when cities still dreamed of heaven, and it was chosen not out of pride, but remembrance. For those who built it sought not glory, but endurance. They poured concrete where once stood marble, set stained glass in steel frames, and raised cathedrals whose bells were powered by engines. The air filled with the scent of oil and incense, as if holiness itself had taken on the fragrance of machinery. In those early years, the church decreed that the city would be raised as both shield and shrine. The faithful called it a bastion against the infernal tide. The heretics whispered that it was a tomb for the living. Beneath its streets, masons carved sanctuaries and shrines, their hammers echoing like prayers in the dark. They sealed relics and weapons alike within the same vaults, unable to tell which were divine and which were cursed. The scholars of the Office of Virtue recorded each act of construction as scripture, noting every poured foundation as a sacrament of endurance. But the most sacred work was done not above, but below, in the crater's deepest heart, where light faltered and stone wept moisture like blood. A chamber was formed, a vault that would contain the uncontainable. None spoke of what it was meant to hold. Some said it was the last echo of the holy city, others that it was a wound in the world itself. When the final seal was placed, the priest declared it perfect silence, a space where even God might pause to listen. Over that silence, the city was raised, a cathedral resting upon an unhealed scar. As centuries passed, New Antioch became both legend and lesson. Pilgrims from every corner of the fractured earth came to kneel upon its ramparts, whispering prayers into the wind that howled from the crater below. The faithful marched in endless crusades, and the heretic legions answered with engines of damnation. Yet within the walls of New Antioch, the bells still rang, slowly, steadily, with the patience of eternity. They rang not for victory, but for persistence, for the belief that endurance itself was a form of grace. And so the city stood, layered upon its own history, like pages of an unfinished scripture. Beneath its towers, the sealed chamber slept. The masons were gone, the priests long entombed in their iron cloisters, but the silence remained, immense, watchful, and alive. Those who worked the night shifts in the foundries claimed they sometimes felt the ground breathing beneath their feet. The scholars dismissed such talk as fatigue, but the pilgrims called it the heartbeat of creation, still pulsing beneath the wound of the world. Thus began the story of the city and the crater, a story of walls built over whispers, of faith rising from ruin. And though centuries have passed, and the engines now outnumber the saints, the silence endures beneath it all, unchanged, unbroken, waiting. And so the age began, only to end again. Chapter 1. Engines of Grace. Morning in New Antioch begins not with sunlight, but with sound. Bells toll in the smog, engines breathe beneath their towers, and from every quarter of the city rises the same patient rhythm, the measured heartbeat of industry turned to prayer, the faithful awaken to it, as others once awoke to the call of birds. For here, metal and muscle labor alike in devotion to build, to mend, to endure. These are the city's psalms. The air is heavy with incense and oil. The streets glisten with dew that is half condensation, half sanctified residue from the upper foundries. Along the buttressed avenues, processions of workers move like columns of pilgrims, their tools gleaming faintly in the haze. Every motion is ritual, each rivet a benediction, each weld a verse in the liturgy of endurance. The church decrees that every act of creation must carry within it the memory of loss. Thus, the forges are never silenced, for they echo both ruin and redemption. High in the walls, sealed within chambers of rust and glass, the anchorites keep their vigil. They do not speak, nor do they see the world save through narrow slits of iron lattice. Their blood feeds the conduits that warm the cathedrals. Their breath stirs the steam that turns the bells. Once they were men and women of voice, now they are hymns made flesh, sustaining the city by their silence. The office of virtue ensures their sacrifice is recorded in gold-leaf manuscripts that no one reads. Scripture in New Antioch is not meant to be studied, it is meant to be lived. In the manufactories below, artisans labor in vast halls lit by eternal lamps. Sparks rise like fireflies into the black air, and the clang of hammers forms a harmony as solemn as a choir. The overseers chant the measures of their work: grace in the bolt, mercy in the weld, victory in the range. Each syllable marks the joining of the sacred and the practical, the divine and the mechanical. There is no line between them now. To strike iron true is to pray, to temper steel is to atone. Children of the lower districts grow up, learning the psalms of calibration and the catechisms of balance. They recite them not in churches, but in workshops, their hands dark with soot. And though few will ever glimpse the crater that yawns beyond the walls, all know its presence by the subtle hum beneath their feet, a vibration that never ceases. It is said that this hum is the city's inheritance from the wound below, the low note of creation itself, reverberating through generations of faithful labor. The pilgrims who return from the front lines come limping through the gates, their armor dented, their eyes hollow, yet bright with a strange peace. They speak little of the war beyond the trenches, for the language of battle has become indistinguishable from that of prayer. Instead, they kneel before the engines of the city, pressing their foreheads against the cool steel, whispering their thanks. Many leave behind fragments of relics, spent shells, twisted rosaries, rusted bayonets, to be melted down and remade into the next generation of devotion. And so the rhythm continues, from dawn to dusk, from forge to shrine. New Antioch breathes in the unity of purpose. Its people have forgotten what idleness means. Even their rest is reverent, for in their dreams they hear the distant toll of the lower bells, the bells that mark the hours of the vigil below. There, deep beneath the concrete veins of the city, the nameless order keeps watch over the sealed chamber. Above and below, the two rhythms intertwine, the hum of creation and the silence that answers it. Thus the engines turn, tireless as faith itself. The city stands upon its wound, unyielding, patient, sanctified by repetition. To live here is to understand that grace is not found in revelation, but in persistence. Every spark that leaps from the anvil is a fragment of prayer, returning to its source, a brief illumination in the long dark, and when night descends, smothering the spires in smoke and starlight, the faithful rest knowing that somewhere beneath them, in the heart of the crater, the silence still listens back. Chapter 2. The Order Below. Beneath the arteries of New Antioch, past the last trembling light of the lower factories, lies a realm that does not know dawn. There, the air is damp and mineral, tasting faintly of salt and prayer. It is said that no map holds these tunnels, for they are redrawn by time and necessity, expanded not by design, but by obedience. The walls glisten with condensation, their veins of rust glowing faintly where the machines above send warmth downward. The sound of the city becomes distant, softened into a single long breath, the exhalation of a giant sleeping beneath the world. Here dwell the nameless order, the keepers of the vigil. They call themselves nothing, for a name is a claim, and they are vowed to silence in all things save duty. Clad in robes of lead-grey cloth, they move like slow shadows through corridors lined with old inscriptions. Their lanterns burn a pale blue oil that does not smoke. It is a light meant not to reveal, but to remember. Every motion, every ritual, every step they take is guided by rhythm rather than sight. They live by cadence. Even their silence has a pattern. At the center of their domain lies the Hall of Instruments, a vast, low chamber filled with relics of measurement. There the order reads the pulse of the earth, as others once read the stars. Needles trace circles on waxed scrolls. Pendulums whisper secrets to patient ears. Each tremor is recorded, each subtle shift beneath the vault given a name from the liturgy of stone. The monks do not speculate. They observe, they kneel, they endure. It is said that to doubt the purpose of the vigil is to invite madness, for the deeper one listens, the less the distinction remains between the heart of the listener and the heart of the silence itself. In one corner of the hall stands an altar built of old artillery casings, polished until their surfaces mirror the lamplight. Upon it rests a single sealed chalice, a relic of uncertain origin. The elders say it was found during the city's founding, deep in the crater, before the vault was sealed. It has no seams, no inscriptions, and yet when the bells above toll, the metal sings in harmony. None dare touch it. To do so would break the balance. It remains as witness, as reminder, as question. The novices who join the order come from every class of the city, the children of soldiers, artisans, even scholars whose minds have frayed from study. They arrive barefoot, carrying only a strip of linen upon which they will one day write their own confession. Upon entry, their tongues are anointed with dust from the crater, and they vow never to utter their given names again. Speech is forbidden, except for psalms, and even those are whispered so softly that they seem only the memory of sound. Each novice is paired with an elder, for in the depths, solitude is perilous. The elder teaches the rhythm of maintenance, how to cleanse the senses of oil, how to read the flux in the steel, how to pray without words. Together they descend through galleries of forgotten machinery and catacombs of sanctified bone. The novice learns that faith is not a flame, but a weight, and to bear it is both burden and blessing. Some break beneath its silence. Others vanish altogether, absorbed into the order until no one remembers their faces. Once each month, when the upper bells sound the hour of alignment, the order gathers before the sealed chamber. The air trembles faintly there, charged with a stillness that feels alive. The walls bear the marks of centuries of supplication, palms pressed into stone, prayers carved with trembling knives, tears dried into salt along the seams. The elders stand closest, their foreheads nearly touching the metal door, and for a moment, the entire Undercity breathes as one. It is said that if you listen then, between heartbeats, you can hear something vast, inhaling far below, a sound not of menace, but of remembrance. The youngest among them, a novice newly initiated, often lingers after the gathering. His thoughts drift like motes in the cold light, unsure whether to fear or to hope. He feels the pull of the silence, as if it recognizes him, as if it speaks not to his ears but to his marrow. His elder notices, but says nothing. In time, every warden learns that curiosity is not sin, only the prelude to faith, for to serve the silence is to accept that understanding is neither owed nor needed. And so the order endures, generation upon generation, a living architecture beneath the city's stone and steel. They ask no questions of heaven, no forgiveness of earth. They listen, they record, they remember. Above them, the city hums with the labor of saints and engines below. The chamber waits, sealed and perfect. Between them lies the thin layer of obedience that holds the world together. For as long as the vigil is kept, the wound remains closed, and new Antioch endures, its faith measured not in revelation, but in the steadiness of those who guard its silence. Chapter 3. The Knocking in the Deep. In the 5th winter, after the novice took his vow, the city above was wrapped in fog so thick that even the towers of the cathedral seemed to float, rootless, in the pale. The bells rang without echo. Their sound was swallowed by the vapor and returned as a low vibration that trembled through the pavements. In that season, supply trains were delayed by weeks, and the heretic fronts fell strangely silent, as though even the enemy awaited some unseen verdict. Beneath all of it, the order kept its vigil unchanged, counting time by the slow breathing of the earth. It began, as most revelations do, with something so small it might have been missed. A tremor, no heavier than a sigh, passed through the measuring rods in the hall of instruments. The elder who observed it marked the parchment with his usual care, expecting it to fade as many anomalies had before. But the line did not return to stillness. Instead it repeated, once, then twice, each pulse, precise, deliberate, as if answering its own echo. The elder watched the needles shiver and settle again. He wrote, a rhythm beneath the silence. Word moved through the order, like the ripple of a distant bell. They gathered in the hall, their lanterns casting circles of blue light across the ancient gauges. The novices stood at the back, their eyes wide beneath hoods stiff with soot. The air seemed to lean toward the floor, listening. Once more the rhythm came, soft, measured, patient, a single beat, followed by another, each spaced as evenly as the toll of a clock that has forgotten its hands. It was not the movement of stone or pressure, nor the strain of the deep machinery. It was something older, quieter, more aware. The elders consulted the records kept since the city's founding. Nowhere did they find its likeness. In the margins of the oldest scrolls were sketches of disturbances long past, bursts, sighs, whispers, but never a pattern, never repetition. The order debated in silence, their gestures slow, deliberate, cautious. Some believed the vault itself was shifting in its long sleep. Others whispered of resonance, of something below replying to the rhythms of the forges above. But the oldest among them simply knelt, closed his eyes, and began to pray. For 7 nights, the knocking continued, sometimes faint as breath, sometimes strong enough to make the glass in the lanterns ring. In the chambers nearest the sealed door, moisture quivered upon the stone in perfect circles. The younger monks took to sleeping upon the floor, their ears pressed to the cold metal to feel the pulse through bone. The elder forbade it, yet did not punish them. Curiosity, he said, is a kind of faith that has not yet learned restraint. Above, the city began to notice. The machinists in the lowest forges claimed their tools vibrated without touch. The anchorites in their sealed cells reported dreams of endless stairways descending into light. A rumor spread that the silence had begun to speak. The office of virtue dismissed it publicly, but dispatched engineers under the guise of auditors to inspect the lower tunnels. Their instruments failed one by one. Compasses spun, watches stopped. They left the depth pale and wordless, and their reports were sealed in wax. On the 9th night, the elder led a procession of the order to the sealed chamber. Each carried a lamp and a strip of linen, their confessions of years past, rewritten for the moment. The air near the door was warmer than before, and it smelled faintly of ozone, like air after lightning. They knelt and began the psalm of containment, the words drawn from a language no longer spoken above ground. Their voices, soft as dust, filled the tunnel in gentle waves. When they fell silent, the knocking answered once more, slow, deep, compassionate. It was not a call but an acknowledgement. The novice felt it in his chest, as if his own heart had been caught and matched. He closed his eyes and sensed, not sound, but meaning, something vast and patient stirring in the depths of its long solitude. A warmth spread through him, not of fire, but of recognition, as if the silence itself had remembered him. The elder placed a hand upon his shoulder, grounding him back to the present, yet said nothing. There are moments when language can only lessen what is holy. When dawn came, the rhythm ceased. The instruments returned to stillness. The floor cooled, and the city above exhaled, as though released from a dream. The office declared the disturbance resolved, attributing it to geological stress. But within the order, none were convinced. The novices whispered of the knocking as prayer. The elders recorded it as anomaly. The elder who had prayed first called it grace. In time, even that word faded into the careful language of their records, a rhythm beneath the silence, continuing unseen. And so they kept listening, for faith, once awakened, cannot be returned to sleep. The city resumed its patient labor. The engines turned, the bells tolled, the pilgrims marched, but beneath it all, in the marrow of the stone, something had shifted. The silence had spoken once, and in that single exchange, the world remembered how to listen. Chapter 4. The City That Listened. In the weeks that followed, New Antioch seemed touched by a calm that was not peace, but expectancy. The fog that had hung for months over the battlements lifted, and in its place came a dim radiance, not from sun or moon, but from the clouds themselves, which glowed faintly, as though they remembered light. The citizens went about their labor as before, yet every hammer blow and every toll of the bell seemed softer, more deliberate, as if the entire city had drawn breath and was waiting to exhale. No one spoke of the knocking aloud, but all had heard of it in their own way, through rumor, through prayer, through the steady vibration beneath their souls that was gone now, leaving behind its absence like a hymn, half remembered. In the manufactories, artisans paused between shifts to wipe soot from their faces and glance at the floors, expecting the faint trembling that no longer came. The overseer's chants grew slower, more contemplative. Even the anchorites in their sealed chambers felt it, the void where the pulse had been. Some called it mercy, others dread, yet most simply accepted it, for to live in New Antioch is to live within paradox, where absence is presence, and silence is a kind of speech. The office of virtue issued no decree, but subtle changes began to ripple through the city's routines. The sirens marking the hours of work were retuned to a lower pitch. Processions of pilgrims were rerouted away from the outer trenches and toward the basilicas nearer the crater's rim. It was as though the city itself had turned inward, its gaze fixed on its own foundations. Priests spoke in softer tones, and the market crayers' voices lost their usual harshness. Children played their games without laughter, yet their quiet carried no sadness, only wonder, as if they were mimicking the reverence of their elders. In the evenings when the forges dimmed and the towers released their heat in slow sighs, citizens gathered on rooftops and terraces to watch the horizon. Beyond the walls, the plain shimmered with a strange pallor, the remnants of 1,000 battles erased beneath frost. Sometimes a flicker passed along the front, like lightning trapped beneath the earth. The veterans among them crossed themselves, remembering nights when that light had meant bombardment. But this glow was different, steady, diffuse, benign. They whispered that perhaps the silence had spread, carrying its patience outward. Below, in the chambers of the order, the instruments recorded nothing. The wax scrolls bore straight, unbroken lines. The novice continued his duties without falter, though his dreams were filled with a soundless light that pulsed like the beat of a distant heart. He never spoke of it. The elder watched him closely, sensing the quiet change that faith had wrought. In the elder's gaze there was no suspicion, only recognition, the understanding that every generation of the vigil finds its own communion. Then, one dawn, the Duke himself descended to the lower tunnels. He wore no regalia, only a heavy coat and gloves, stained with oil, for New Antioch's rulers are craftsmen before they are sovereigns. The order received him with bowed heads. He asked no questions, and none offered explanation. Standing before the sealed chamber, he placed a gloved hand upon the cold metal and remained so for a long while. Those who were present said that his shoulders trembled slightly, though whether from fear or revelation none could tell. When he turned to leave, he spoke a single phrase, a benediction or command. No one could say, "Let the city listen." From that day forward, something shifted in the rhythm of New Antioch. The bells rang less often, the sermons grew shorter, the forgers began to rest between cycles, their engines left cooling in reverent intervals, the citizens learned to pause. Even the birds, rare as they were in that iron-bound air, seemed to circle more slowly above the spires. The city had taken its ruler's words as liturgy. Weeks passed. The war beyond the walls continued, indifferent to any miracle of patience. Yet reports reached the city that along certain fronts the weather had calmed, shells buried in mud failed to detonate. Soldiers of both sides were found sleeping in their trenches, their weapons forgotten beside them. These accounts were treated as heresy by the church, yet they spread nonetheless, carried in the murmurs of pilgrims. And among those who believed, there arose a new saying, that when New Antioch listens, the world remembers how to rest. Night after night, the novice found himself drawn to the chamber. The elder, now too frail to descend, gave him the lamp without a word. He would sit before the sealed door and place his palm upon the steel. It was cold, lifeless, and yet beneath that lifelessness he sensed a depth vast beyond measure, like the calm of an ocean floor. He no longer hoped for the knocking to return. It was enough to know that it had once been there, and that it had not been in vain. In silence, he kept vigil, and the city above breathed with him. Thus new Antioch endured, not through conquest or invention, but through listening. The engines still turned, but with gentler cadence. The bells still rang, but as whispers rather than declarations. Even the war, endless as scripture, seemed to hesitate at its edges. The silence had entered the hearts of men, not as command, but as memory, and in that memory was peace, fragile and fleeting, yet real enough to be felt. And so the city listened, and the world for a moment listened back. Years passed, though in New Antioch, the years were not counted by calendars, but by the rhythm of bells, by the soft rise and fall of its machines, by the breathing of the earth beneath its foundations. The city aged as all living things do, imperceptibly, patiently. Towers blackened, frescoes faded, names eroded from plaques and monuments, but the silence beneath remained unaltered, unmeasured, unchanged. The records of the order grew thicker with repetition, their entries becoming meditations rather than reports. The phrase "a rhythm beneath the silence," continuing, unseen, appeared again and again, like a refrain that had forgotten its song. The elder who once guided the novice was laid to rest in the catacombs of the order, his body folded into the dust beside generations of keepers. His successor, the former novice, continued the vigil with a grace that seemed born not of duty but of quiet affection. He no longer sought meaning in the knocks or tremors that had ceased long ago. Instead, he listened for the spaces between them, the intervals where thought dissolves and faith begins. His face grew lined, his hair silvered with the soot of years, yet in his eyes there remained the same calm light that had once reflected the sealed door's faint glow. Above, the city endured its endless cycles of labor and reprieve. Wars flared and receded beyond the horizon, like storms, leaving no lasting mark upon the spires. Pilgrims still came, drawn by stories half remembered, of a heart that once beat beneath the stones, of a city that learned to hear God not in thunder, but in pause. They brought offerings of silence, moments spent kneeling, breaths held between prayers. It was said that on still nights, if one stood at the edge of the crater and closed their eyes, they could hear the city itself whispering, not words, but the soft friction of grace against stone. The office of virtue, ever cautious, declared the vigilance of the order to be an example of perfect obedience. Yet among its scholars, a quiet heresy grew, that the silence was not a prison, but a covenant, that what lay beneath was not contained, but sustained by faith, and that the city's endurance depended not upon sealing something away, but upon remembering to listen. Such thoughts were never spoken aloud, yet they rippled outward, shaping sermons, tempering zeal, softening judgment. Even the forgers began to temper their metal with more care, as though every blade and bullet carried the weight of reflection. In time, the keeper of the vigil felt his strength fade. One evening, he walked the lower corridors alone, lantern in hand, following the familiar route toward the sealed chamber. The air was cool, the walls damp with their eternal condensation. He paused before the great door and placed his palm upon it, as he had done countless times before. The steel was warm beneath his hand, warmer than it had ever been, and for a moment he thought he heard something stir, perhaps the echo of his own heartbeat, perhaps a memory long folded into the stone. He smiled, and in that smile was no fear, no yearning, only gratitude. He spoke then, though none were there to hear. "You have kept us, and we have kept you. Let this be enough." He extinguished his lamp and sat upon the threshold, leaning his head against the sealed metal. There he remained until the watchers found him at dawn, his features serene, his lips parted as if in the middle of a breath, the silence, ever patient, had taken him without sound. The chronicles note that after his passing, a tremor ran through the city, not violent, but vast, like the sigh of a mountain. The bells did not ring that day. The forges fell still. Even the wind seemed to pause. The citizens stood in their doorways, listening. Some claimed they heard a single deep tone rise from the earth, like the first note of a hymn too great for human voice. Others said there was nothing at all, only the shared stillness of a people remembering the same truth at once, that all faith, in the end, becomes listening. Now, centuries later, New Antioch endures. The wars continue beyond its reach. New saints are named, new engines forged, yet beneath it all, the silence waits, unchanged, unbroken, eternal. The order remains at its post, nameless and unseen, their vigil unending. The city above hums softly, half prayer, half machinery, a monument to patience. And somewhere below, deeper than even the memory of sound, something vast and merciful listens back. So the age turns, as all ages must. The silence teaches what no scripture can, that the divine is not always the voice that calls, but the space that answers, not the flame that consumes, but the ember that endures. And so it is written in the hearts of all who dwell in the city of ash and grace, that endings are only pauses, that faith is a rhythm unbroken, and that every silence is a promise waiting to be heard. And so the age ends, only to begin again.